Never
Anything to
mind.
add?
Yep. Thank you for, yeah, we are, I had that, I actually had it as a sticky note. I didn't look at my sticky note. So thank you for that, Ian. And yeah, I do have it recorded now, and we'll be recording all future roundtables for this kind of educational purposes for us and new folks that would be coming in the future. So one thing talking about candidate interviews and then looking at search parameters, there was an example I kind of wanted to bring up, and actually Ian and I discussed this because I thought it was very relevant to this. Is we had a situation, or I saw a situation this week where I was talking to a candidate, and a candidate had extremely specific job parameters as far as location. They wanted to be within 30 minutes of a certain location. And we had a Curari representative that spoke to that individual about a week prior, and that um, that candidate told the recruiter same thing, 30 minutes. I can only be 30 minutes from this location. And so what I did yesterday when I was talking to the candidate is I kind of pushed back a little bit. I kind of talked and started looking at, and this was, I didn't say it exactly in the wording that what Ian said yesterday, but I'll get to a point that Ian made that I thought was excellent, is that I kind of said, well, is there any reason or any, that you would expand that, if the right job came along, or it, I can't remember how I put it, but I was just kind of pushed and looked at, is there any way that you would expand that beyond the 30 minutes? And we ended up finding out that, yeah, we would go up to 60 minutes away. So what I started looking at jobs. Every job that we had in that area was more than 30 minutes, but they were right in between 30 and 60 minutes. And there was one, I think that might have been, let's say, 70 minutes away. So what I did is we had a nice discussion. It wasn't very long, but we had a nice discussion. And I did a name clearing email to three places, and so far two have been denied, and one I haven't had a response from. But the really important thing to know in this is that the one that was declined, they said, "Oh, we can't decline because we're talking to her and she's interviewing later this month." And why that's so important to bring up is that the first interaction that we had with her was zero activity. Like, we didn't put out any name clearing emails, didn't put out, anything, because, like what Jerry says is, we're taking food orders. It's like, okay, candidate says 30 minutes, it's 30 minutes. We're following that exact. Nothing within 30 minutes, we're moving on. And so while I didn't have any success, I did push back. I did try to kind of be creative with these boundaries. And now we ended up finding out that the candidate was introduced several weeks previous. But there is scenarios that I've seen that where I have pushed those boundaries, where I have gone a little bit further out, and where those clearances happen. And I've had candidates who've taken jobs that have told me, I want 30 minutes within this spot, 60 minutes within this spot. And we end up, finding positions with them a little bit further. Now, in this case, we wouldn't have gotten the send out, but just think about other scenarios where that this would happen. That, let's say we don't push those boundaries a little bit. We don't send that name clearing email out, or we don't try to expand that conversation with the candidate. And it's very, very possible we could be losing out on an introduction, an interview, and possible placement. So that was something I wanted to definitely bring up to you guys to, you know, to to push those boundaries a little bit. And, like for instance, that I shared with Ian is that, I'll get it all the time. And I'm sure you guys do in Chicago. I want to be in Chicago. I want to be 30 minutes away. I want to be 45 minutes away. And then if they're telling me 30 or 45 minutes, I'm, not, I'm kind of ignoring it. It's like, okay, well, they're telling me 30 or 45 minutes. I'm looking 60 to 90 minutes away. And that's what I'm going to, that's what I'm going to look for, because one of the things we have in that is we do have plausible deniability. If a client comes back to us and says, I talked to the candidate and they're not interested, we do have the ability to be able to retract that a little bit, because we have spoken to the candidate. We do know they're looking in Chicago, and we can really easily tell, the client that, look, I'm sorry that right within her search parameters. And I guess this is a little bit further out than what he or she wanted. And it's really easy to backtrack on that. But there's, I think, a lot of placements or a lot of money that we're leaving on the table by not, um, extending those parameters a little bit more. And I think the thing that Ian said yesterday that is a great word tracking is because you're just looking for a door, you're just looking for a door to be cracked. You're looking just to see if you're constantly in this job looking for just an opportunity. And once the opportunity presents itself, you like kick the door open. And so his word tracking that he gave to me that I think is really good is, let's say they're looking within 30 minutes. And you can say, well, if the perfect job came along and it was a little bit of outside of that radius, would you consider something a little bit further out? And if the answer is even maybe, door's open. If the answer is yes, the door is wide open. And then you know that what their parameters that they're telling you are might not be the actual parameters. And that's why it's good to really dig into the candidates, to build a rapport with them, to ask a lot of penetrating questions. And there's so many different questions that you could ask them, but you're just looking to see where the real intent is. Because what they tell you, it's not that candidates are going to necessarily lie to you, but what they tell you up front may not be what they're actually looking for. You may find out things about them like family, spouse, children, things that are important about their family, things that are important about their children. And let's say, for instance, I've had this with candidates, great schools are important, or certain, religious things are very important. And let's say within a 30, 60-minute radius, those things are not found, but hey, an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes away, they've got some of the best schools in this particular state, or this particular thing that your child is involved in. They may not have it within this radius, but they have it, let's say there's an awesome swim team 90 minutes away, and that's what their kids love to do. Well, if you find out those things, or if you find out that they'll say, yes, I'll go further for the perfect job, you're just looking for opportunities there. And like Ian said, if you hear that word tracking, whether it's the job, spouse, family, anything, you know immediately that the parameters are much more wide open than what they might have told you. And another thing I'll add to this is that so we can be effective in this job. The Curari machine is awesome. Candidate responds to a job, we do the send out. We never talk to the doctor places. It happens, and it happens, regularly. We can be effective via email, via text message. Those are all, in my opinion, effective but secondary tools. Nothing will ever compare to great phone conversations with a candidate or video conversations if you do that. AI is a wonderful tool. Nothing compares to something that is in your writing or something where you're having personal conversations with a doctor, because relationships matter, rapport matters. And this is a prime example of, it's not like I said doctors are lying. They just might not feel comfortable to share all the information with you that they really are, what they really hold. So the more communication you have with doctors, the better rapport you have with a doctor, the more they're going to open up to you, the more they're going to share with you, the more their parameters or may change. And also they may be a lot more specific with you about what they're looking for, allowing you to be much more detailed in your job search, or eliminate certain jobs that just may not be the right fit for them. And in a lot of cases, and I don't know too many times where that rapport building can happen outside of phone calls. I guess it can happen, but it's almost always that way for me talking to doctors via voice or video. And so, with that, what I would say is there's some times where after like the first call, I get some good information from the candidate. After the second, third, and fourth call, every call I get more and more details and able to build more rapport. And I think what's most important in those phone calls is they view me as someone that knows what I'm doing, someone with who they can trust. I want to be their most trusted advisor. I want to be their counselor. I want to be their advocate, their advisor. And the more I can build myself as that, the more that they can trust what I'm saying and know what I'm talking about, the more open they will be to me. And that usually doesn't happen in the first conversation. So what we'll talk about in job parameters or candidate interviews is that I can a lot of times get additional, details from them. I can get additional parameters from them, um, after some initial phone calls. So that was definitely one thing I wanted to kind of touch on. I was telling Ian a lot of what I do is what's called assumptive recruiting. And so, in a lot of circumstances, if I'm doing a proper candidate interview and I know exactly what they're looking for and the jobs, because what I'm doing is not just throwing stuff out there and seeing if it sticks. I'm looking at, does this particular job match something that this candidate is looking for? And if that is the case, and and we have to look at the job details, we have to make sure that all these factors that a candidate's looking for matches this particular job. And it could be just location only, but there could be other factors in that also will match. And so what I do is if I believe and I have good reason and I have that plausible deniability, I'm sending a name clearing email. And let's say for a particular candidate, because there's some one-offs where candidates I'm sending one send out, two send outs, but there are some candidates who I have a more open parameter, and I might do 8 to 10 send outs. I'm not sharing all 8 to 10 jobs with the candidate that I've sent their CV to. Now, if I'm doing, there's plenty of cases where it's one job, two jobs, three jobs, and we're talking about all those jobs over the phone, because we can really focus on that. But a lot of times, if I'm doing 10 send outs, what I'm going back to the doctors with is if I get feedback from the client that says, I am interested in talking to this doctor, or I have reached out to the doctor, or I'm going to reach out to the doctor, I'm dropping everything I'm doing. That's priority number one. I'm going back to the doctor. The bait text, if we have it available in our RMS, I'm sending them the bait text, or I'm sending them details on the job. I'm, texting them. I'm calling them. If they don't answer, I'm sending them a text. And then, I'm saying, hey, so-and-so is reaching out to you. They have reached out to you, or they want to talk to you. Here's the details on the job. And then the big thing is I'm taking control of the situation. I'm not asking them if they're interested, because I already know based on their parameters and what they told me based on this good candidate interview that they are going to be interested. So I'm just basically saying, not would you be interested? Here's who's reaching out. Here's who wants to talk to you. What is your availability for a telephone call? Or this client is available at this time. Can you make this work? If not, when can you make it work? So I'm, being very, very assumptive, and I'm also being very taking control of the situation, acting with confidence, and basically directing the candidates on what they should be doing rather than them trying to take control of that situation. And there's so much to unpack on that we'll not be able to do it in the roundtable. Those were just things that I wanted to, mention. And a couple other things I've written down that I wanted to mention is how important it is I used to be in a completely different industry, and we did a lot of face-to-face sales, and we do a lot of conventions. And one of the things we were trained is to mirror whoever you're talking to. So, and because we're not seeing people in person, most of the time we're not seeing them via video, what I'm trying to do is be a chameleon. Be a chameleon to our client, be a chameleon to the candidate, and trying to mirror however they're doing things. So if they're a very tentative all right, sorry, internet went down. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Broke
sorry.
up at it there very tense.
But no, I was just saying I try to mirror them. I try to mirror their actions. I try to look at what what they're doing, because really I'm playing a game. And I'm trying to be in control of the situation. And a lot of times by mirroring, you can control situations by just taking yourself to where they are. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Another thing I wanted to mention on clients is that my philosophy that I've always followed, and it's never failed me, is to be extremely conservative with owned and exclusive clients, your colleagues' clients, and to be much, much more aggressive with non-owned or exclusive. So if I'm going to push boundaries, push parameters, if I'm going to be ultra aggressive, it's not going to be with one of my colleagues' owned or exclusive clients. I'm, there's only two ways I'm sending a name clearing email over to a colleague. It's, have I talked to the doctor directly about their job, or do I have real reason? Could my colleague pull up that doctor file and can they see, okay, I see why Jeremiah is sending this. That's something really important I wanted to bring up, and we can talk about that during the Q&A, is that try to be very, very conservative with my owned or with others' owned and exclusive clients, and be much more aggressive with non-owned and exclusives. And obviously, I'm wanting to protect my colleague. I'm wanting to protect my colleague's client. But also the reason why I'm aggressive with non-owned and exclusive clients is I'm looking for touches. I'm looking to communicate with clients. I'm looking to speak to as many clients as I can, to update jobs, to get jobs to do mailers on, to help out Curari to get as many jobs in the system as I can, so that you all, if I don't put details on the job and I put a new job in, you guys can grab those jobs. You can talk to the client. You can get them on the web. You can do all this awesome things that's going to generate candidates for you. But that's something, I definitely wanted to bring up because I think that is, really important. Now, as far as giving some specific examples on, doing some parameter shopping, I'm going to go through these quickly, and then we can, go through the Q&A and ask some questions on this. But there, in the agenda, there were 4 examples that I gave, and I'm looking at my screen so I can look at, each of these candidates here. But one was a husband-wife team that was, husband was full spectrum, wanted everything from OB to ER to inpatient work, and wife was outpatient only. Both were Ivy League medical school grads, Yale and Dartmouth. Awesome guy, awesome candidate, very responsive. And when talking to him, it was, initially it was Oregon, Washington, and the Western U.S. mountain states. So if I was taking food orders, I would have stopped there. However, when talking to him, we started chatting. We started chatting like people. We started talking about nothing related to recruiting. And, I let him know, I'm like, hey, he's like, well, where do you live? And I said, up in Minnesota. He's like, oh, I interviewed in Minnesota. Oh, you did? Where? That opened up a conversation where I'm like, so what about the Midwest? What about the upper Midwest? Is that a location that you and your wife would consider? We started talking about the outdoors and lake life. And then I looked at his CV, and then I'm like, oh, I see in your CV that you and your wife were up in the Northeast doing medical schooling. Have you guys ever considered there? Well, not really Massachusetts or Connecticut, but New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, absolutely. And then I went back and asked him, before just splattering him, I was like, so can I be aggressive with your search? I've got a lot of jobs out there for candidates like you that are going to be interested in talking with you. Can I be aggressive with your search? Yes, you can, as long as it fits what I'm looking for. So I just wanted to go over that really quick, because I was able to present him to a lot of upper Midwestern jobs, a lot of New England jobs, and I wouldn't have done that if I didn't ask him those questions. So that was one that I wanted to bring up. The other one was an OBGYN who, A+ candidate, has been practicing at the same practice for 20 years, clean malpractice history, which is huge for an OBGYN that long. Her husband passed away, who was also a partner in the practice. So she's like, I've got 2 teenage kids. I can't handle the schedule anymore. I'm out. And it was like, I need to find a good laborist job. So we started at, initially she was like, okay, I only want to look in Chicago and the surrounding areas, or be drivable distance within a couple hours. So we looked a little bit, and that was kind of like follow-up conversations. Great lady, got back to her and said, I've got a few options for you, but most of my good options are going to be a little bit further away. Could you consider, Indiana? Could you consider Ohio? So then I presented her to a few other places. She then got back to me at a later date and said, Well, hey, do you have any? I thought about GYN too. Do you have any GYN positions? And I started asking her about, locations, and we ended up finding out from like say our third or fourth conversation. Yeah, I would love to be in Florida. I would love to be in these states or this state. And she's like, I also received a mailer, and it wasn't from me, it was from someone else. She's like, I received this mailer about Idaho, which was like totally outside of what she was telling me. So that got us into, conversating about Idaho, my time out in the Grand Tetons, sending her pictures on the Grand Tetons, and got her ultra super excited about it. Now, it's not going to work out for her because of a benefit issue, it looks like, with Idaho, although she's still planning to visit. But we probably have her taking a job with the OB hospitalist group down in Mooresville, Indiana, or Virginia. Because also talking to her a little bit further, I started talking to her about my OB hospitalist job out in Virginia. And she's like, where? And I told her, well, Woodbridge. And she's like, my grandparents used to live in Woodbridge. I would love to go to Virginia. So that gave me another avenue. So it's like in the all of these things go back to rapport with the candidate. In both cases, I wouldn't have had these other spots if I didn't have verbal conversations with the candidates, which opened it up. If I stuck Chicago only, I wouldn't have introduced to OB Hospitalist Group, and she probably wouldn't have got a placement, which it looks pretty likely.
Jeremiah, can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
I know we're on a tight schedule, so it won't take up too much time, but what Jeremiah is talking about right now is of the absolute utmost importance to you being able to expand candidates' markets. And really what this comes down to is consistently putting new jobs in front of them that are good, regardless of their preference for geography, right? Jeremiah's throwing out a job in Virginia. Doc had never said anything about Virginia, right? We're not here to take food orders, you guys. We're here to try to convince them that there could be things outside of the scope of what they're thinking now that could still satisfy what they're looking for, and frankly, might be even better than what they initially called us to talk about. So just throwing out these jobs, and I know you've heard everybody say it before, but if you've got if you're calling docs on a single job opportunity, once you've got them, when new jobs come in, think about how many jobs we add every week, right? Throw out the hot jobs to them. Regardless of what they've told you in the past, just be consistent with that, and you will consistently be surprised at how frequently the docs are going to say, you know what? Yeah, I'll take a look at it. I'll learn about it. That's fine. And that's all you need.
Yeah. Really and, to Ian's point, one thing that I've done for 12 years is I look at the new jobs every day. What jobs were put in yesterday? And whatever jobs were put in yesterday, of course, I want to see what the jobs are, but I'm also with the major intent of, is there a new job that were just put in yesterday? Because, like, for instance, on that candidate that we're talking about, we had 6 states tagged in RMS. Virginia is not one of those states. So let's say that I had a new OB hospitalist job that was put in today that I'll see tomorrow. Well, and I can see it's a really good job. I'm calling Dr. Sutherland and be like, hey, I know you're about ready to sign with OB Hospitalist Group, or you may sign with them. What about this job? What about this? And so I'm doing that with all candidates. I'm looking at every job, and I'm like keeping every candidate I have in mind. I'm actually looking at the new jobs. I'm putting up, like, I'll have side by side screens of RMS. I'll have my candidate list on one side. I'll have the new jobs on the other, and I'm going down and I'm looking at new jobs, which of my candidates might be interested in this job. And that is a main priority for me that day, to talk to these candidates about this, because I'm looking to see, is a door open? Is it really where they're telling me, or do I have an open door to look at other options, other jobs? And like Ian said, this is a bait job. We are using bait constantly with candidates, clients. The bait and switch is one of our best techniques here. And if I can use a job to get a candidate to open their parameters and tell me about it, I'm doing it, and it works a lot. So yeah, to Ian's point, that's something I wanted to mention too. Another candidate example here is I had this is another A+ candidate that she came. I think she was assigned to me. So she was assigned to me by the marketing team. And she was a 2025 ABAT All-Star General Surgery candidate who had a contract signed and it fell apart at the last minute. So she's scrambling, trying to find a job. And that was the candidate I saw, like, I need to jump on this and I need to jump on it immediately because she doesn't have a job. She needs to start working in the fall, and she is an awesome candidate. But I also knew that she had her feelers out there. So I was probably one of 30, 40, 50 recruiters that was probably trying to get in touch with her, that was trying to market her. So that was a candidate I knew everything had to be dropped to get her in front of as many people as possible. So this was one where she, told me that, close to Chicago where she has family, up in the Northeast. At that point, she wasn't really looking to expand much further than that. So I started there, had follow-up conversations with her, like, look, you're robotics trained. I don't have a lot of robotics jobs here. Would you consider non-robotics jobs? Yes, I would consider non-robotics jobs. I'm limited in the areas that you're asking me. Can I expand this a little bit further? I've got this job in Pennsylvania. I have this job in Iowa. I have this job, she actually hit on a job in Michigan, which we have a candidate about ready to take a job. And so I told her, well, unfortunately, that job in Michigan's taken, but the same organization has a job in Illinois. It's a little bit further outside of Chicago, but it does give you really close access to Indianapolis. It's in Danville, Illinois. And they don't have a robotic, but they have a really good salary. They have a huge need, and they'll be very prompt in their interaction with you. Is that something that you can consider? Yes. So I got her to say yes on Illinois, got her to say yes on Pennsylvania, got her to say yes on Iowa. So boom, I opened her. I had to be quick, I had to be prompt, and I opened up her search. Now, as we fast forward, we don't have interviews set for her, but we will soon, probably later this week, early next week. We're setting an interview for her with the Danville, Illinois place and also in Pennsylvania. But she got back to me and said, you've done such a good job finding me jobs that are good, and I've been finding some jobs of my own, but let's table the jobs further away from Illinois. Let's table the jobs further away from Pennsylvania and up in the Northeast. She also gave me extra data about, I don't want to be a solo surgeon. I want to have multiple. So that gave me a lot to work off of, but that was one where parameters were minimal, parameters expanded. And because we did a good job, and she also found jobs on her own, parameters went back to being shrunk again. But that was all part of having good rapport with her, good communication. And I was aggressive with her, and she was okay with that. I had Iowa clients reaching out to her, and she was nice about it. And she just said, yeah, I just can't consider those anymore. So I just went back to the Iowa client, was honest with him, and said, she was initially interested, but she found some jobs that were a little better geographically for her. So she's going to work on those. So that was another example. The final one I'll give, and we'll jump into the Q&A here, is we had a doc that was a pediatrician, very specific in her search. Tennessee, Alabama. I'm looking. Tennessee was Central Tennessee, Alabama, anywhere, North Florida. And so I found a few jobs for her. I did 4 sendouts. I didn't blast her anywhere. I stuck to those areas because our communication was limited. And we didn't have a lot of communication. I didn't have a lot of rapport with her. I didn't have the ability to really expand markets. But what I did do is I looked initially. I looked in those areas, was able to do 4 sendouts because I found things that matched what she was looking for. Went back to her and started talking to her like what Ian and I were talking about other jobs. What about this? What about this? What about this? No. Really polite, but what I said is what I'm looking for. Okay, cool. So we ended up getting an interview for her, got an offer in her hands. But now, because I had a good enough rapport with her, there were some contractual things she wasn't thrilled about that we're working through. But the other thing was my husband needs to find a job in the area. So now I have to put on a different recruiter's hat because, now I have to look at, okay, we're now shifting the focus to her husband because she can't accept this job in Jacksonville without knowing that her husband's going to have a position there. So I'm actually online, looking at positions, I'm trying to get her to open up to talk to me about what her husband needs so I can start looking at job opportunities for her husband. We can't recruit for it, but I can at least see what the job market is. She hasn't been receptive to that yet, but that is where I'm going at because I want to find out where her husband has possibilities and what I can find potentially for him in Jacksonville to refer to her. But then also, I'm trying to dig in, and this is going to be my goal later this morning or later this afternoon and into Monday, is going to be trying to find out, besides Tennessee, Alabama, and North Florida, is your husband looking anywhere else? So we're like shifting the focus from her onto her husband. Where else does your husband have job opportunities? Where else is he looking? Is he looking outside of these states? Because now I want to find out, because if she's not actively moving forward with this, we also had an awesome job for her in Anniston, Alabama that she loved, but she just won't interview there because her husband doesn't have an option. And so I'm shifting the focus to her husband, because if I know where her husband has options, or if I know exactly what her husband's looking for, then maybe I can close her in Jacksonville. Maybe I can find something for her for him in Anniston. Or maybe if I find out that he's looking elsewhere, maybe that gives me new markets to expand her search. It goes back to now this is a doc that's, that will be antithetical to what I said about phone calls, because she'll only respond to the occasional phone call, and most of it's via text message. So I'm doing my best to try to have better rapport with her, to try to get her to open up, because I know if she can, there's assistance that I can get. But in every single one of these scenarios, it's all about rapport. It's all about knowing the candidates. It's all about the candidates trusting you, liking you, knowing your name. Whenever I'm conducting I'll finish by saying, whenever I'm conducting candidate interviews, now, when I first started, I didn't have this awesome tool for the, on the right hand side, all the questions that we had. I had a piece of paper taped on a bulletin board or by my desk when we were back in the original office, and I just had to memorize the questions. And so therefore, to this day, I just make bullet points. It's not because I don't, it's not because I don't want to fill out the list. It's just I have all the questions memorized, so I, just take my notes that way. But I will constantly refer to this, these different candidate questions, just in case I'm forgetting something, just in case, I'm constantly looking at those questions when talking to a candidate, so I can keep focus, so I can keep on track, and so I can, ask the necessary questions. And then, so there's really no secret to the candidate interviews. It's just I'm making sure that I'm keeping a priority for myself to talk to the candidates on the phone, do whatever I can do to build a relationship with them verbally, and then going through all those questions to make sure I'm asking all the necessary things. And that's really a roundtable that's completely separate, talking about how to conduct actual candidate, specific candidate interviews, because there's so many other alternate questions that you can ask. But a lot of it's hard to give you a script on, we'll ask this question or this question, other than the 12 or the 13 questions that are listed. Try to ask all questions but those questions will then spin off into other topics if you just listen. If you listen and look for opportunities based on those questions that you're asking, if you're trying to find out the real intent, the real reason, if you're looking at expanding parameters, getting to know the doctor better, getting to know them personally, getting to know their family, their children, once you see the opportunity present itself on any of these questions, I'm just looking down the list, and I don't want to talk much further, but there's just so many of these things, like what is prompting you to take action? When would you like to begin a new opportunity? Rather than just like 90 days, it's like you can ask follow-up questions on that they may provide additional info that's really important to know for using for future content, when doing their search. Finally, what I'll say is that whenever I'm done conducting a candidate interview, I'm immediately telling them, I'm reiterating, this is my name, this is who I work for. I'm going to send you a text message with my name and my email address. Will you please save my information in your phone so you remember me? I know you're getting bombarded with a lot of recruiters, but I want you to remember who I am, because I'm going to go to work for you. I'm going to go to work quickly for you, and I'm going to get results for you. And I'm going to be back in contact with you soon. So I want to make sure that you remember me. So I'm going to send you a text. I'm going to give you my contact information. Please save my, contact, so you'll know it's me contacting you in the future. Doesn't work all the time, but a lot of times I'll call and candidates will say, "Hey, Jeremiah," or they'll respond back to me quickly on a text, because more than likely they've saved my contact information. So yeah, that's how I kind of wanted to conclude this, and hope this was helpful, and just wanted to see, what questions. We'll start off with questions that anyone has, and then of course any comments, feedback that any of you have, any of the senior folks have, would love to field any of those.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Jeremiah. Actually, I was in regards to kind of the expanding parameters to an extent, because this is something I don't feel like I've had as much trouble with, certainly in the past, as recently I've had a lot of luck with expanding parameters. But this may be more in line with another roundtable to an extent. But
Yeah,
with getting candidates to expand their parameters and having that rapport, having them save my number, and they typically know who it is when I'm calling them because they have my number saved. But it's more of the being overwhelmed. Once we've got them in, I get them to expand the parameters. We've got them into several jobs, and then I've sent them to send out previews, and they're familiar with them. But then when it gets to the middle stage of kind of the setting up calls and stuff, keeping them on the hook and keeping them straight on different opportunities. I've
yeah,
said sitting here sending over full details on the job, the likely first point of contact for each of these jobs, but then keeping them in line. I've had a lot of trouble with almost, I feel like, over physicians being overwhelmed after I speak with them and get them to expand the parameters to where then keep them on the hook for different jobs. It's almost like they have so many that they have a hard time settling on one. Or on the flip side, I'll have them where they get really locked in on one of these jobs after I've expanded the parameters. And if you have a client, whether it be on an exclusive or open, that's just really not responding or not getting back, I'm kind of getting them over the hump of like, hey, like this one's kind of on the back burner right now, but like let's get you set up with some of these others, and we'll continue trying on this one, and hope that they get back to us soon. But these other jobs are still meeting your parameters and could be a really great fit. But have had a lot of trouble with that recently. And like I said, this may be more for another roundtable altogether, but just wanted to see kind of strategies when you've run into that. And this may be more dog specific, but I've run into it a decent amount recently with several different candidates.
It's a talking point that I planned to talk about, Evan, and I forgot about it, but it's an excellent point, because what I'll do a lot of times if we have more open parameters on a candidate, I'm not sending them everywhere. When I'm starting off is I'm kind of looking at what are our better jobs, what are our better clients, what are our most responsive clients, what do I can view as, if they have wide open parameters. If they have very narrow parameters, obviously that's different, and I'll be more aggressive. But if there's 30 jobs that are within everything they're telling me, I'm probably not going to do name clearing emails to all 30. No, in fact, not probably, I won't. I'm going to first, as the first wave, there's multiple waves. So it's not like, let's say 20 name clearing emails here. It might be 10. And what I'm going to go through is the first wave and look at what are our best jobs, what are the best fits, what are our best clients. And that way, maybe I have 5 jobs that I presented them to. So I might not be overwhelming them right away, if that makes sense. I might be able to get back to them with 2 or 3, because that's the number of clients that want to talk to them. And then from there, it's like I'm testing it. I'm just testing them to see, okay, they gave me these parameters. I opened their parameters up, and I gave them our best. I gave them the best matches, the best details, the best clients. And do they bite? Or have I just wasted some time? Because if I quickly find out I wasted time, or they're not a great candidate or not that responsive, then I kind of feel it out. It's like, have I overwhelmed them with 3 or 4 jobs? No. Ask them, can you take on more? Yes. Great. Let's go. Or if times I'm like, okay, I've got enough good things for them, and I can tell they're a little bit overwhelmed. They're not super responsive because they're ultra busy. Maybe I'm not as aggressive at that point. But I start off by testing it with our best, and then holding on to other things for future use. And then I'm just like I said, I'm testing them. I'm testing them to see how they respond, and how their response is how I act in the future. Kind of reading the room, so to speak, just trying to read the room on where this doctor is, and based on how they're responding to things, that will choose how I my course of action in the future. Does that kind of answer what?
It does, because that's where I've been with kind of doing that first wave of testing. But I'll get into 5 or 6 jobs, and even that, I think it's more of a candidate specific thing. And then I try to send takeaways on them, and they come back, well, no, like I'd still consider, but then the rubber's really got to meet the road, because it's one where I'll do a first wave of the top areas of interest, but I've had some of them come back, and it's been their top. They're like, out of these 6, I like these 2, and it's like Tenet and HCA, and it's like, oh boy, like that's
Yeah.
a little unfortunate, because you're trying to push for them, but they're obviously not clients. They're going to be nearly as responsive as that particular doc I'm referring to is the Centerwell, Archwell, a couple of those that we are making more placements with, kind of falling to the back burner. So it's just happened with a handful recently where they've either told me they could take on more, and then we get to looking at more, and then setting up calls is difficult, or within that first wave, even it's hard to get responses and calls set up because of how busy they are, especially for the practicing physicians. But
Well,
Let me jump in here real quick, if that's okay. Yeah. So,
please.
Evan, I appreciate everything you're saying. You're talking about a lot of different topics right now, and I appreciate that. I want to try to condense this back to kind of the matter at hand. In particular, I want to go back to the idea of overwhelming a candidate, or in particular, candidates that are very open. Okay. I think there's a misconception, and I want to dispel it right now, that for candidates that are really open, that you've got to try to find a way to narrow it down right out of the gate. Don't do that. That's a mistake. Instead, take them for what they've said. Okay, take it at face value. And like Jeremiah is saying, you have to test their commitment to what they said. Get them to defend their position. Okay, so if they're really open, stop asking them questions that's going to help you restrict the geography at that point, and start taking some actions on things that are going to get them that will allow you to prove, are they really that open or not, right? They're going to be pragmatic. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. So when you start taking some of these actions, that's when they're going to come back with objections, like you're saying, Evan, or they're going to say, oh yeah, that works great. I'm interested. Either one of those is fine. Remember, this is a job where you have to be okay, quote unquote, wasting some of your time in order to get to the truth, in order to get to the bottom of what you need to know to be able to take confident action. And one of the keys here that Jeremiah is mentioning is you don't want to go, all the way so deep into this effort that now maybe you've wasted too much time, right? There is a line there where you want to be cautious, because all we've got is time, right? That's our most valuable commodity right now. So hand pick some jobs, maybe they're really open, and you look and you see there's 20 or 30 jobs that could work for them. Maybe you already know they are not going to be interested in all 20 and 30 of those jobs. Just not going to happen, right? So you're going to hand pick some, you're going to get their information sent out. Then you're going to go back to them and say, hey doc, what do you think? You ready to get on the phone with them? This is when they're available. If they shoot that down, guess what you're asking? Why is that? Now you're able to go back and narrow those 20 to 30 jobs to jobs based on what docs has said, that you've got a much better chance of being successful with. Okay? So this kind of, checks and balances, this testing of their commitment, defending their position is absolutely critical to you taking confident action. And that all goes back to, as soon as you've done something for a candidate, you got to let them know. You got to let them know, so that way you can either push that forward or kill it right away. The problem arises when you aren't taking that type of immediate follow-up action on what you've done for a doctor, that then things start to seem out of control. Things start to seem overwhelming, because now you've not controlled the process. So control the process for the doctor. I know it's corny. A lot of you heard me say it. Be the captain of their search ship. You're the one directing what they're doing. It's not the other way around. When it starts to become the other way around, that's when things get really hard. That's when you all get frustrated about the process. And so, really just keep this in mind. You don't have to narrow it down so much, but a really thorough interview is going to allow you to take reasonable actions. And then when you go back and you test what you've done, now you're in that confidence zone.
Yeah, outstanding, Ian. Yeah. And also what Ian's saying there too is then if you're conducting a really thorough interview with the doc and you're doing you're acting based on their parameters, you have the word that we keep talking about, plausible deniability. You have, if something happens where they're not interested or whatever it may be, or they're not interested in the future, it's like, well, this is what you told me. This is what we discussed. And you're just acting within, the parameters that you're aware of. You never want to like, all right, doctor told me they're interested in the East Coast, but I'm going to send them out to California. That obviously is something that we see and you don't want to do. But anything outside of that, yeah, absolutely, don't restrict it. What else we got? Who else has questions, comments, anything like that?
Jeremiah, how much do you worry about like really specific stuff? Like let me give you an example, okay?
Yes,
like
please.
Doc says, I need to make sure that this hospital has this many beds, or I need to make sure that there's going to be a university nearby for my spouse to look for employment. Like, and I'm not saying that these things are irrelevant, but when you're taking initial actions to try to get things going, how focused are you on some of those things? Or do you feel like sometimes those are a little extraneous and you can come back to those later with the quality of a good job?
I think the quality of the good job outweighs, all of that. So I think it's certainly important. I mean, there's certain things like if they say, but even then that's kind of fluid when they say like no critical access hospitals. And I've seen times where they'll look at one even though they say absolutely not. So I mean that all I would see that as like those extra things, the the schools, the different things like that, as kind of the final hook, the final nail in the coffin. Like if they were trying to decide between two jobs, and then you're like, well, this job has great schooling, this job doesn't, or if it's like all jobs are equal, well, just let me give an example to answer what you're saying. Candidate about ready to place is in Texas. She has two jobs, one close to DFW where her family is, one in Palestine, Texas. Both jobs are equal. Both jobs she'd be happy with it. One of her determining factors for the job is the fact that her brother loves fishing and hunting, and Palestine has great fishing and hunting. But that wasn't the reason why I sent her to Palestine. We talked about that, and I pushed for her to take this other Canton job with Christus Health, but that wasn't the reason why I presented her to Palestine. It's just I utilize those things at the end to push Palestine over the edge because it has great hunting and fishing, and that was important for her brother. Does that kind of answer, Ian, what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of the point I'm making is that there's always going to be a lot of variables to a physician's search, and you don't have to have all those figured out on the front end.
Well, and Ian, to your point too, it's like she wanted to be close to her parents, but guess what? She's not going to take a job in Dallas. That's where her parents are. She's taking a job an hour and a half away. Those hunting, fishing things were important to her. That's not the reason why she's taking the job. She's taking the job because she was most comfortable with the organization and they had the best offer for her. But she's not taking the job because of actual location. Otherwise, she would have done it in Dallas. She's not taking the job because of the, extracurricular things. She's taking the job because of the group and the job. That stuff mattered, but that's not the reason why she's taking the job. All right, what else does everyone have?
I had a quick question on the husband-wife couple. I know you sent them over to one of the one of the opportunities up in Wisconsin. It sounds like when you're working with, say, like a pair, the husband obviously has more desires, specific needs as to what he wants his practice to look like. So at that point, you're quickly finding out he's going to be more of the deciding or the decision maker between him and his wife. Sounds like his wife has a lot more flexibility, and then mainly talking with him, expanding his search parameter, and then running with it.
Right. Yeah, because, you know, his wife, both family medicine docs, she wants outpatient only, small communities, rural communities, Ivy League medical doctor. I would find so many jobs for her would be ridiculous. I'm not focused on her. I'm not worried about her. Unless, you know, of course, you know, we start finding stuff out. Like one of the questions I'm going to ask, you know, the husband is, well, what does your wife like to do? You know, what's important for her in communities? What, you know, it's not that I'm not going to present them to other jobs. It's just like, okay, what hooks do I have? You know, what, you know, how do I get them to not consider certain jobs and to consider others, you know, not like as the main tool, one of the tools. But yes, the focus is on him because he is ultra specific on what he's looking for. You know, like he said, ER work, inpatient. We had some clients that shot back and said, well, we really don't have a lot of ER work. And I went back to him and asked him, and he's like, no, I have to have ER work and I have to have a certain amount of volume. And you know, the client that you're kind of taking over, Mitch, down in Utah, I went to the client and said, look, doc, exactly what you're looking for. You know, Yale trained, loves rural Utah, but his wife needs an outpatient only job. So it's like the flip is like, I'm not sure I have an outpatient only job, but I have the job for him. And so a lot of it too is understanding who the candidate was and knowing where to look for them. Like this was opposite of what we normally see. I'm not going to big communities. I'm not going to large organizations because I know the only place that he's really going to find what he's looking for are these small rural hospitals. So that allowed me to understand what the candidate was looking for, knowing that, okay, I have an open search, but I can't just throw them to family medicine jobs. I have to target rural areas because that's what's going to allow him to do a full spectrum. So yeah, so that's how I'd answer that.
Nice. Thank you.
I will say one last comment, Jeremiah, just that you mentioned earlier about the, you know, having good notes and being able to send to an owner exclusive. I feel like that's one thing that for me certainly is like a client owner just in general with searches as far as being able to push candidates forward. You know, if we've done a send out and like one of my clients comes to me and says, hey, could you tell me a little bit more about this doc and their search? Do they have any ties? Do they have anything? Like, you know, having notes in the file where I can go if it's somebody else's doc and pop in there, like just really quickly if they're out of the office or if they call in to me. Like I had one call in yesterday, Eagle Physician Group there in Greensboro, and like had asked some questions on a doc we'd sent over, and being able to pop into the file, like having the notes in there can certainly help. I feel like from an only exclusive client standpoint to be able to push candidates forward, and that obviously comes from the interview process and being able to have that stuff and move candidates along.
Yeah, a little bit off topic, but I would say too, you know, with that, I know it's something that we've talked about, Evan, Ian and I have talked about this, is that make it a practice to, as things slip through the cracks, we all make mistakes. I do regularly, but make it a practice when you're looking at, especially owned and exclusive clients, but also every job, look at the notes. You know, if doctors are telling you very specific things, like this doctor I'm talking about has to have ER, has to have this, you know, a resident, a hospitalist that doesn't want codes or procedures. Look at the notes. Look at the job notes before sending a name clearing email over to make sure that there's nothing glaring. You know, there's a lot of gray area in what we do, but we also want to look at the black and white and make sure that there's not anything in the job notes to eliminate that candidate, because nothing looks worse than to send something over like, I don't want to do procedures. This is a procedure heavy job. This candidate has to do vent management and intubations. And I have no idea if the candidate's willing to do that, you know, stuff like that. So that's the one thing I'd add. Just please try to look at as many of the job notes as you can. I know we can't all be perfect in it, but I think that's one area of improvement we can all make. So to conclude, and y'all could hang out as long as you want, I just want to, you know, let you know Dave Bick will be leading the meeting, or I'll be introducing, kind of monitoring the whole meeting next week. But Dave Bick will be presenting, and he's going to be talking about how to write good jobs and some of the things he's going to talk about. And I'll send this agenda out on Wednesday, and we'll have surveys available for everyone next week, for the meeting. And we may also send it out for one for this week if anyone wants to comment on it. But he's gonna talk about getting details for a job, getting details for the community, what should go into sellable points as far as the paragraph is concerned, good bullet points for the job, good subject lines for the job, and putting it all together and writing the right job, and whether you should or should not do a mailer for that particular job. So that's what Dave's going to talk about next week. And then, the week after that, Ian's going to be presenting. And then in July, we've got the rest of our management, July and August, the rest of our management team is going to be presenting something. And we would, of course, open that up to anyone that felt that they had a topic that they wanted to present something on. For anyone that has questions that weren't answered that you want to ask individually, please come to me or your managers, and they certainly, any of us will be more than happy to answer any additional questions. And other than that, I hope you all have a great weekend. I have my daughter's graduation party tomorrow, so we're hosting a graduation party. And what sucks for us on a personal note is we have this beautiful lake property, and whenever we have big get-togethers, whether we had a huge family reunion last year, we have our daughter's graduation party, we've had multiple other parties, I swear 75% or more of the time we get rained on. So we have this property where the lake's just teasing us hey, we're out here, but y'all can't come out here because it's raining. So we've got rain tomorrow for my daughter's graduation party after planning this big outdoor extravagant thing, and now we're all going to be crammed inside our house. So, but we'll make the best of it. But yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And like I said, any questions, comments that you guys have on this, let me know, let your managers know, and we'll just go from there and look forward to Dave's presentation next Friday.
All right. Thanks, Jeremiah. It was awesome.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeremiah.
you.
Appreciate it.
Terrence, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I'm not sure what's going on. You talked about how a lot of this is assumptive. This question may not necessarily pertain to interviewing, but setting the schedule for the first conversations. Are there any times where you will tell a candidate that a client has these times to talk without knowing, just to kind of pull out what times they actually have available? I'm wondering how you can push that information out of them to present you with, or give you a time that you can confirm with a client, or vice versa. Or do you wait for direct communication from your client to say, hey, these are the times I have available?
Ian, I'll let you cover this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one where the best way to do that is say, hey, I know my client's going to be really interested in talking with you, and I'm certain they'll have some availability soon. What's going to work best for you?
I got you. No, I mean, I was just wondering if you even ever took it a step further and said, hey, my client can probably talk at these times before actually talking to them.
Well,
I don't know.
Kind of, Terrence. I mean, I would go so far as to say, hey, I know they want to talk to you. Can I tell them you would be available at Thursday at 4, Friday at 3? Right.
Gotcha.
I want to get them to commit to specific times and dates. And part of that is not just to try to facilitate the connection, which obviously is uber important, but it's also to try to get their buy-in, right? If they're willing to commit to a call right away and give me dates and times, they're really interested. If they hem and haw about it and they're like, well, I don't know, I got to think about it, I need more details. That's probably when I would break out some sort of a softish takeaway and be like, so are you just not that interested in this job? I mean, I know I don't have all the information that you need, but the way you're going to get that is by getting on the phone. I mean, do you just want to cross this one off the list?
I think I just
See what they say. I mean, I think the quicker that you can try to get them to establish their position, the better. But yeah, getting those dates and times. Feel free to embellish a little bit. But I don't, this is a job where we don't ever have to lie. I don't want to do that. No, that's not what you're insinuating, Terrence, at all.
Right.
But the reality is that we can kind of dance around that and make sure that we're getting buy-in for those times. So yeah, I'll say, hey, I know that the next step here is going to be a phone interview. When can I tell them that you're going to be available? I'm confident they could do it sometime this week or next. Do you have time Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? What times work best for you?
I got you.
Then I
And
can
the
flip
reason,
back and go to the client and say, hey, I just talked to Dr. Jones. Great news. They're excited to talk with you. And they told me they're available Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at these times.
gotcha. The reason I brought that up is just because I've ran into issues where you're just going back and forth, waiting for people to tell you their availability. And I feel like if you set the availability for them, that might push things a little further faster.
There will.
Is all, right? So that's why I was
Money
asking
there.
that question.
Good
It
point.
might hopefully avoid, two lines of communication that you had to have. If you couldn't get them on the phone, maybe a certain word track will eliminate a couple back and forths that you didn't have to have. So that's why I was asking that.
Yeah, good question.
Excellent.
A lot of that I find is setting expectations with the candidate as well on those calls. So instead of necessarily getting the times, like setting expectations, this is going to happen. Are you going to be in a position to give me times? And like you can kind of feel out like how they're responding. Hospitalists, one trick I have, if they're 7 on 7 off, understanding when their off times are. So then you can be like, cool, well, can you take a call any of those weeks, for instance?
Yeah, and like we were saying earlier, Tom, it's you taking, and Ian said it too, taking control of the situation, not letting the doc take control. And I think a lot of times I don't know if it's timid or what it is. It's just we're just always trying to ask for their permission, always trying to ask, kind of letting them take control. So yeah, I think the more control we can take, the better.
One thing I just mentioned real quick, sometimes I'll have a doctor say, well, I could talk to him on this day at 3. I mean, they give you one option. And I'll say, well, you know what? That is great. I will let them know that. But here's the thing. You have to remember, we've got 3 or 4 very busy people on that end that are going to need to talk to you also. And if they're not available at Tuesday at 3, then I got to get back to you and get another time. Give me 3 times right now. And I will let them know. And I'll bet you if we have 3 times, we're going to be able to pin them down to one of them. And, when you do that, they'll usually, oh, well, okay, I can do it this time, or this time. And that cuts down on that going back and forth. And
Excellent.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yep. All right, y'all. Well, I'm going to pause or stop this recording, and I'm going to jump off here so I can begin my weekend. I hope you all have a fantastic, memorable weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.
Congrats, man.